Hello everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am the Sipping Tea, and today I'm going to talk to you all about the Cold War Premium Super M48 medium tank. Briefly, however, before I get into that, I just wish to issue a huge thank you to my two patrons, NB Hollywood and Niger898, for your continued support. It really does help me make these videos. An additional shout out and thank you goes to everyone who has stopped by to say hello on my Twitch channel. I have been streaming a little bit more regularly recently, and I do plan on introducing giveaways on my Twitch channel yet again in the very near future. So if you're not already following me on there, then please do click the link below in the description and hit follow on Twitch. So with all that being said, let's get into it. So the Super M48 is of course a very new addition to World of Tanks console Cold War. I very nearly didn't buy it initially as it was well over my personal gold threshold. So jumping in straight with that then, I suppose, the purchase price, full price of this tank is 12,500 gold, which again, as I just mentioned, is over my 10,000 personal threshold. As you can see by the fact that I've clearly purchased this tank myself, that threshold is very much not set in stone. If a tank does appear to be worth the purchase, assuming it's not astronomically high of course, then the chances are I probably will go for it, but it does require a little bit more thought before I go straight into it, and I'd urge you to use the same sort of caution, if you will, when spending your money, in-game or otherwise. But this is not some sort of financial advice channel. Anyway, battle earn rates. So the silver earn rate on this tank will give you an additional 50%, so quite decent for earning silver, not the very best but not too far from it either. The tank XP earn rate is an additional 10%, which is nothing particularly special, I would say. And finally, the crew XP earn rate is an additional 25%, which of course is very good. You rarely see tanks with, in Cold War anyway, with a crew XP earn rate that high. So this tank, I think, really can be tweaked to become a very good crew training tank. So the sort of setup for that is probably quite obvious, but nonetheless, depending on how much you wanted to maximize it, you've obviously got the 25% of the tank. You can then go for an additional 30% using a hero commander, any sort of crew XP booster, so obviously that depends on what you have and what you're willing to use, or gamble, because of course as soon as you equip a booster you can guarantee that you're going to have a terrible game, because that's how the game works. And then of course you've got two other options which, from my perspective, and indeed from others, that may be a little bit more sort of questionable. The first one is to go for rations, because you do get an extra 10% crew XP on that, which, you know, fair enough, a lot of people do use rations. As you can see from my previous gameplay footage, I'm not one of those guys, but that's just me with my hang up about premium consumables. And the fifth option would also be the crew skill, which gives additional crew XP. Now that one is probably the most controversial out of the entire list, purely because of course it is technically a wasted skill slot for as long as it is there. However, of course it will boost you along with an additional 10%, and it can be swapped out at the end at a well, an additional cost to you in gold. So that one right there might be a little bit questionable. It just depends how fast and loose you are with your cash, and indeed how impatient you may be. If you're someone who might well spend a fortune on free XP to level up your commander, then the equivalent gold cost to switch out your skills is, well, negligible. It's never going to cost you as much to do that than it would be for the amount of free XP required, assuming you've bought it, which you probably would have done. Right, moving on from there, let's have a look at the key statistics of the tank, starting as per usual with the gun. So, penetration values. The standard rounds offer 449mm of penetration, the premium rounds offer 505mm of penetration, and the Hesh rounds offer 250mm of penetration. The damage for those rounds, both the standard and premium rounds offer 460 damage alpha, and the Hesh rounds offer 570 damage. So, not too bad there, I suppose. I mean, personally, as you no doubt will have seen, I tend not to carry premium round or really use premium rounds in the vast majority of my tanks. Given that the damage is of course the same and it's only a penetration difference, yeah, it may well be worth just sticking with standard rounds, as 449mm of pen is quite generous. So yeah, and for Hesh rounds, well, I don't tend to gamble. I like to have a more consistent damage, so I probably wouldn't use the Hesh rounds either. But then again, this is of course me and my play style, which is by absolutely no means the textbook way of doing things. In fact, it's probably the wrong way of doing things, but it is mine all the same. The other gun characteristics then, so the standard reload rate of the gun is 8.3 seconds, which gives it a rate of fire of 7.23 rounds per minute. That is of course, as per usual, in the tank, well, is the tank in its vanilla state, so nothing's influencing that reload or anything, so no equipment, crew skills, consumables is affecting that. So it can and does get better. The aim time is 2 seconds and the accuracy is 0.37. The accuracy is not particularly great right there, but again, it can and does get better with the appropriate well, buffs, let's say, the aforementioned. Gun depression is 9 degrees and gun elevation is 19 degrees, so reasonably good on that front. Moving on from there, we have a maximum forward speed of 56.3 kilometers an hour and a maximum reverse speed of 23.5 kilometers an hour. The engine horsepower is 1000 horsepower, which gives it a horsepower to weight ratio of 18.89 horsepower per ton. And finally, the engine fire chance is 10%. So what am I going to recommend? Yes, I'm going to recommend a fire extinguisher. Of course I am, because I am paranoid. And finally, to finish off the key statistics of this tank, you'll see on the little graphic on screen right now that I've got the vision range all the way up to 548 meters, and the still concealment is 420 meters. So by no means should you really pursue any sort of camouflage build with this tank. That is probably quite obvious nonetheless. But yeah, clearly not the way to go on this one. The vision range is quite decent, so you can get some pretty good spotting damage, so long as you're not coming up against too many sort of try-hard light tanks, perhaps. But yeah, otherwise it is a very good tank for vision range. And of course, last but not least, it does have a fairly impressive 2850 HP, which for a medium tank is extremely good. I mean, that's right up there with heavy tanks, I must say. So that could well be an argument to go for a whole patch kit instead, as you'll obviously get quite a decent return on that when it is in use. So this is where we move on to the armor viewer section of the video. So the problem that I face here with the Super M48 is that it has an enormous amount of different, very small usually, sections of spaced armor. So instead of me waffling on naming off every small, inch square fraction of the armor, I think instead what I shall do is do a slow rotation of the tank as you see it now, and slowly go through the different armor pieces. I'll give honourable mentions to the sort of large sections of the armor, so 10mm for the side skirts, for instance, But yeah, otherwise I think it would just be a bit too sort of well, waffly for for this video. You can perhaps see why. 20mm here for the actual tracks themselves. But yeah, you can see an awful lot of smattering of really tiny little notches of armor here that are completely negligible, and you'd never really necessarily want to know about it. But yeah, the gun coming in at 45mm, sort of the rear of the tank there, the main protection around the engine, 50mm. But otherwise, yeah, lots of tiny little bits and bobs that individually don't really matter too much for the most part. Obviously, 76mm there is a larger section. But yeah, 80mm for those little bits. I mean, that's not really going to be something you'll ever keep in mind during the heat of battle. Like, oh yes, I've got to keep this 85mm section of my turret pointed towards the enemy because, well, that's going to offer more protection than the one next to it that was, you know, 5mm less or whatever. I mean, yeah. Just like in most aspects of the game, you roll out, you keep your fingers, toes, and every other part of your body crossed in order to pray to the RNG gods that you don't get penned and that all your shots do pen. So you can see here that around the turret, of course, are an awful lot of very small bits of spaced armor. The gun mantlet and just generally the front of the tank really, or the front of the turret really does get the lion's share of the armor, which is unsurprising. This tank is very good at going hull down and absorbing shots into the turret whilst coming away relatively unscathed usually. But there we are, that concludes the armor viewing section of the tank. Sorry that it's a little bit sort of, well, let's just go with different from the previous ones, but hopefully you can understand why I haven't just listed every single section where it almost looks like they've sort of splashed it like paint flicks off a brush with additional spaced armor. It's just far too much detail to go into. You'd fall asleep if you haven't already. So, moving on from the armor, let's now talk about consumables. Now, of course, I know you can see what consumables I've got at the bottom of the screen just there in the gameplay. However, since this footage was recorded, I have now actually changed my my loadout for the consumables. So what I carry now is a premium repair kit, a regular med kit, and a regular fire extinguisher. So the difference being from the footage to what I carry now is the difference in med kit. Initially, when I first started playing this tank, I felt like it did suffer from having crew getting knocked out relatively easily. I then played a few more games and that wasn't really happening so much, so I guess in my early games I was just a bit unlucky, which created a bit of a false impression of the crew being that bit more vulnerable than they perhaps should be. So yeah, I have switched it now to just a regular med kit, and I feel like that has been perfectly fine to do that. I haven't been suffering because of that change. So yeah, I mean, once again, it's also me not really wanting to use premium repair kits or consumables where I can avoid it. But yeah, that's the main change between what you see on the screen and what I now do on a day-to-day basis with this tank. From there, let's move on to the equipment. So with this, I do have, as you'll see on the graphic on the screen right now, I carry vents, advanced loader, and also the gun stabilizer. So this really has improved the gun handling overall. It's a huge difference to the accuracy alongside the crew skills, which we'll get into in a moment. But yeah, it's my sort of standard loadout. You'll see, and have no doubt noticed in a lot of my other videos, where these pieces of equipment are available. because of course they typically aren't always available. Like for instance, the advanced loader isn't always available on a tank with a clip, for instance. Moving on now to the crew skills. So you'll see the brand new graphic on the screen here that came along on Tuesday's update. So here you can see that I have 5 of 9 available skills on this crew for the moment. They are undergoing training in this tank. So the skills that I have are Sixth Sense, Born Leader, Rapid Loading, Steady Aim, and Run and Gun. So the accuracy crew skills on this have proven to be invaluable. It has boosted the tank's accuracy all the way to 0.25 at 100 meters, which really does make it far more accurate than it used to be, as you'll notice from the difference in the standard accuracy stats that were mentioned at the start of the video. In conclusion, I would say that the Super M48 is very much worth your attention. The 12,500 gold price tag is a little bit on the expensive side. However, obviously I went for it myself, and I feel like it has been a good decision. The fact that it's got such a good crew training bonus really does make it worth that extra, in my opinion at least. If you can, of course, get it on sale at some point, which will probably be quite some time given that it is a brand new tank. But yeah, if you can find it on a sale at a discount to make it a bit cheaper than that maximum price, then you should jump on it, I would say. It really is a very good tank. So yeah, I would say get this tank if you can. That brings this video to an end. I'd love to see you all on my Twitch channel if you do watch Twitch. But otherwise, thank you ever so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.